In May 1961, a naval aircraft was flying over the Arctic Ocean and sighted an abandoned Soviet research station. A few days later, the Soviet Union announced that they were forced to abandon station NP9. The ice had begun to crack, and this had destroyed the runway. The station was now impossible to reach. They had left it in a hurry, thinking that it was now inaccessible, and this got the attention of the US government. What if they could somehow set foot on that island and retrieve whatever the Soviets had left behind? This is Project Coldfeet with hindsight. During the Cold War, intelligence was power. The Arctic and Antarctic Research Institute in St. Petersburg led the Soviets' intelligence operations on the Earth's poles. They used so-called drift stations. These are small research stations that are temporarily built on floating ice sheets, and they had acquired an incredible skill. The first drift station began its mission on May 21st, 1937, close to the North Pole. The station drifted on the ice for little under 9 months, until it finally melted off the coast of East Greenland. The mission was led by Otto Schmidt and had purely scientific incentives, but the potential for extracting intelligence would later be fully exploited during the Cold War. The missions became longer and received considerable funding, but they were tricky to operate. These stations are built on constantly moving ice sheets and are subject to some of the harshest weather conditions on Earth. It was particularly challenging to bring and take people, and it wasn't uncommon for a mission to be abandoned prematurely. That's how it started. The US Navy aircraft was flying over the North Pole as it did every month. It was collecting aeromagnetic data to get a current picture on the ice cover. They spotted the NP9 looking like it was hastily abandoned. They reported this to the ONR in Virginia. The ONR was immediately interested. That previous year, they had set up an acoustic surveillance network in the Arctic Sea with the intent to track Russian submarines passing through the region. They expected that the Soviet Union was doing the same, but there was no evidence to back this claim. This could be their chance to peek behind the curtain. The NP9, however, was very difficult to reach. It was too far into the ice pack to be reached by an icebreaker, and it was out of range for a helicopter. But the ONR had one more trick up its sleeve. They had access to an aerial retrieval system that was secretly developed in the 1950s. An airplane would fly over at a low altitude and at low speed. On the ground, the person spans a lift line between two steel poles and attaches himself. As the airplane is flying over, it engages with the lift line using a hook and holds the person up in the air and into the airplane. The system was tested successfully for the first time just a few years earlier, and this could be the moment to use it in the field. The plan was to depart from the US airbase in northern Greenland. They would fly little under 1,000 kilometers or 600 miles to the abandoned station. 2 agents would jump out and navigate with their parachutes to the island, but there were a few setbacks. Officials at the highest level of the Navy didn't like the odds. They felt that this idea would likely cost the life of the agents. But after some convincing, the permission did come through. But it was already late September and the winter was kicking in. The equipment was sent to an airbase in Florida to be tested for use in colder temperatures. And this is when they discovered some weaknesses with the gear, which would take another few weeks to solve. The NP-9 was drifting further away from the US airbase, complicating the mission even further. Then, winter set in. In March, the US received intel that the Russians had now also abandoned NP-8. A pressure ridge had destroyed its airstrip, and they were forced to abandon it quickly. This was a newer, more modern station, which had been in service for over a year. Its location was more accessible, and the US was now already prepared. They received permission from the Canadian government to use their airbase at Resolute Bay, a mere 1,000 kilometers from the abandoned station. The US wasted no time. They flew their equipment from Maryland to Fort Churchill, and from there to Resolute Bay. They were now waiting only on an up-to-date position on the station. Around that time, the reconnaissance flight was about to take off. Once per month, an airplane would take off from northern Greenland to Alaska to accurately map the ice cover, to hope to get a sighting of the station to confirm its position. But bad weather and a navigational error prevented this. They didn't have a sighting, but they felt confident enough to set out using their drift models. So 2 aircrafts took off from Resolute Bay, one carrying the drop party, and another one was a backup plane just in case immediate retrieval was necessary. The weather was perfect. They began searching with 10-mile intervals, but after searching for hours in the predicted location, the station could not be located. They tried again, but without success. The weather was getting worse, and at that point, the mission was called off. The ONR had stopped funding for the project, and it seemed like a dead end. On May 4th, during the monthly reconnaissance flight, the station was spotted again, but there was no budget for another attempt. Then, the CIA showed interest. They were willing to fund another attempt with some alterations. They decided to take off from Point Barrow, the northernmost point in the United States, to avoid losing time over obtaining diplomatic clearance from Canada. On May 26, they took off to get an accurate location. But after 13 hours of searching, they returned without a sighting. They tried again 2 days later, but this time they had success. The station was in sight. There was no time to waste. The following morning, they did a practice round in front of Point Barrow. The system was tested successfully, and they took off over the icy sea. The weather conditions were marginal at best. Warmer temperatures had heated up the ice mass, causing a dense fog to form. But despite all of that, they located the NP-8. The agents jumped out and landed on the abandoned island. Now, they were committed. In the dense fog and with freezing temperatures, they had 72 hours to retrieve all the intel that they could get their hands on, and they did. After their time came to an end, they installed the retrieval system just in time to be picked up. Despite the fog and the bad weather conditions, the pilots spotted the agents. In 6.5 minutes, both agents were hauled back into the aircraft, each holding on to a bag of valuable intel. Mission accomplished. I looked through the documents that they retrieved, but not that much is available online. The CIA released a public report calling the intel of very great value. They found out that the Soviet station was configured to permit extended periods of silent operation, confirming the importance that the Soviets attached to acoustical work. In addition, it showed that Soviet research in polar meteorology and oceanography was superior to US efforts. But they mostly lauded the operational success, calling out the exceptional skill of the pilots and the coordination and efficiency of the crew. The official CIA YouTube channel made a video about it, and they wrote several articles to spread this story, because let's be honest, it makes them look pretty badass. The Black Vault requested the intel to be declassified. The only document that was approved for release was this, containing a very short summary of the mission and the admission record of this painting into the CIA art gallery. With some imagination, it depicts the experience of the agents on the North Pole. I guess the information they retrieved is either still relevant to their national security, or the CIA prefers to emphasize the heroism of the agents. Continue watching. The video on the left is my suggestion for you to watch next, and the video on the right is suggested by the YouTube algorithm. Pick one, and I'll see you on the other side.